Well, you know, I was part of the drafting of the law. The West only has seed corporations. They don't have farmers who breed or conserve. Indian farmers have bred seed. One wild plant turned into 200,000 rice varieties. So when WTO was being imposed on us, I went to the then minister, Chathuranand Mishra, and said, A, we don't have to implement UPOV because in WTO we have an exclusion that we can do sui generis laws, not do UPOV. And because we are a breeding culture, and the farmers have been breeder, we should write a law on within reasonable limits plant variety protection, but under all conditions farmers' rights. That's what our law is called. That's the law under which Pepsi's claims have been thrown out. They had tried to sue Gujarati farmers, four farmers, 4 crores or something. And when I saw this, I sent my book called Origin, which documents each of these law evolution. And even in the High Court of Gujarat, the Pepsi case had been dismissed because Article 39 says farmers have a right to save, improve, breed, sell seed, and no corporation has an absolute right to deny them these rights. Well, given that India is an agrarian society, we have intentionally stayed agrarian. I was at the Earth Summit in Rio, 1992, and there were these street kids being cleaned up and thrown out of the city. All the peasants had been uprooted, and they were on the streets. And I asked myself, how come in India we have peasants? And then I looked at all the movements again and again, 1901. The movement for land rights in Punjab and our northwest provinces. So Chotu Ram passing a law on land alienation. The farmer's land can never be taken away, no matter how indebted the farmer is. That's why the northwest stayed owner-cultivator. There is nothing like landlordism. Of course, landlordism and zamindari was brought into the east, and we had that correction also. We had Operation Barga, so that the tiller got the rights to the land. Now, as long as we respected the rights of the farmers, we had 3 things. One is the land was taken care of. If you just look at the photos, you know, my father, a forester, used to tell me there are more trees on the farms of India than in the forests of India. Every agriculture, and we stayed small farmers because after independence we reversed the zamindari. The second thing was, unlike the Green Revolution myth that we were starving in 42 with the British, with the Great Bengal famine. We were not starving after that because we created laws like the Essential Commodities Act. And the third important thing was, because it was fair for farmers to stay home and with a fair income, they weren't migrating into the cities. So we didn't have the explosion of urban areas without any facility, the slums that have grown. And all of this tells us clearly that the agrarian crisis is more than a rural crisis. It's an urban crisis. It's at the root of non-sustainable cities. It's at the root of the water crisis. 75% water is getting used in the industrial system. It is at the root of basically the dispossession of farmers. Do you remember the COVID? When it was impossible for the workers to make a living in the city because their salaries were cut off. And no government made the facility of their going back. Remember the marches back home? Thousands of miles they walked back to the village. At least they have something there. So they will go back to the village if we make village life dignified, decent, sustainable. We started saving millets when I realized how distorted the vocabulary of modern varieties was. You know, millets were called primitive varieties. They call them mota anaj. But if you know the millet, the reason they call millet is because they have the Latin million,
Okay.
100,000 seeds.
Okay.
In a little grain, 100,000 seeds made the little seeds. So small was made mota, nutrition was made primitive, and so from that time onwards when we started Navdanya, we've been saving millet seeds, and I've been encouraging the women.
Yeah.
Keep growing this, keep eating this. No, women understand, because they say these fellows, the husbands, think white rice is, and that's why they can't walk, that's why they can't work. We eat our mandua jangora, and that's why we can climb the mountain. So we call them forgotten foods. And we said we will make these forgotten foods future foods. So I'm very happy. This year the UN has recognized millets, the year of millet, and I just hope they won't do to millets what was done to quinoa.
Okay.
When quinoa was recognized as nutritious, all the quinoa was imported into world markets. And the Peruvian Andean highlanders are eating the global dish, Nestle's noodles. And the millets are being eaten by the Californians. And we don't want a world where our poor people stop eating millets. So that's why I hope the introduction into the PDS system, that the awareness by farmers, they must first keep their millets for themselves and sell the surpluses. Well, they're the answer to climate crisis, first because they have no emissions, because they can grow without chemicals, unlike the Green Revolution rice varieties, which are bred for chemicals. And contrary to what has been said, the millets failed. I've worked with farmers, including Uttarakhand farmers. They were with me day before at the Navdanya farm. And everyone said, other crops failed, but the millets did not. The mandua and jangora survived a drought, less water, less rain, but even a heavy rain, they survived. So they're climate resilient.
Okay.
So they fix more carbon dioxide and therefore a mitigation measure. And they have more adaptation and resilience. And that's the reason we must grow them. Of all seed.
Of all seed.
All seed.
Okay.
And particularly millet. So in the belt, coming from Dehradun to the plains, some people have started planting Monsanto's hybrid corn, which is being pushed everywhere. And our study shows 75% goes for animal feed. Now this year we've had very heavy rain, and everywhere there's this much water in the fields. And the corn fields of hybrid corn are totally burnt. They can't tolerate too much water, because all modern breeding is created for a niche of inputs. They're developed in labs or they're developed in research stations. When Monsanto introduced the hybrid corn in Bihar in the first year, total failure. And Nitish Kumar had to compensate the farmers instead of getting Monsanto to do it. So it's not true that the millets are failing climate change. Well, you know, we have one of the most ancient agriculture science cultures, just as much as we have the most ancient health system. You know, agriculture is 10,000 years old. Albert Howard came to India. He was asked to improve Indian agriculture as the imperial agriculturist. 1905. He arrived in Pusa and he found the fields were fertile, the soil was rich, and he identified two principles that Indian farmers practice. Principle one, they always grow diversity. Practice two, law of return. They always practice circularity, not a taking, and an extraction.
Okay.
So I think we need to recognize that if the best scientists have followed our indigenous agriculture with its biodiversity and the law of return of giving back to the soil, why are we still stuck with the Green Revolution system, which is not a science? Why do I call it not a science? Because from what I've learned all these years, the soil is a living system, and taking care of the soil is the first act of agriculture. Growing biodiversity is what maximizes output, and we call health per acre. Now, we cannot have a food system that is running cars of the rich. We cannot have a food system that is torturing the animals in factory farm. So we do need to come back to the relationship of nutrition. I call food the currency of life. And the currency of life moves across all beings. The pollinators give the food to the plant gives food to the pollinators. The mycorrhizal fungi gives food to the plant gives food to the mycorrhizal fungi. Those relationships are totally missing in the understanding. I call it the science of living systems.
Okay.
Because these are living systems. In 91 for the United Nations, I wrote a report, most farmers of India are women. When you see farmers as those who work the land. Now, the idea of ownership of the land was introduced by the British. We didn't have private ownership before that. I think it's 1787. I think Lord Cornwallis said all the land of India belongs to England. And that's where the issue of Lagan started, of extracting taxes from our peasants, and that's why they starve to death. So how do we correct the issue of land? We've got to reclaim land as a commons. And that means use rights. We always had use rights, not private property rights. The use rights must be shared by men and women. There's no reason why the people who would work the most shouldn't have a right to decide. In fact, I helped the National Commission of Women write a policy called Women in Agriculture. And it's supposed to go to Parliament. And every right that must come to women, the seed rights, the water rights, the land rights, it's all laid out. And that's how we should go forward. I say GMO, I mean a technology that's non-renewable,
Okay.
a technology that's a monopolistic technology in the case of cotton, in the hands of one company. So the Competition Commission of India recognized that there is a monopoly on cotton seed through BT cotton. Now, Monsanto came into India illegally with BT cotton, and with the arrogance that they have, put full-page ads in the newspapers. Next year, Indian farmers will be having Bolgard. Now, I've worked enough around the world to know Bolgard is the trade name of Monsanto. And because we'd written laws that seeds cannot be patented, it's through the trade name they were controlling. They showed an American patent to the Indian seed companies and said, we have a patent. Indian companies, without knowing IPRs, just started to give them royalties. I did a seed pilgrimage to understand why are farmers in distress. Through the suicide belt. I didn't realize I would find it as the BT cotton belt. From Vidarbha to Andhra to Karnataka. The Cotton Research Institute, which is India's biggest breeder, stopped releasing varieties in Vidarbha. So the highest suicide belt is the Vidarbha belt. And the price used to be 5 to 10 rupees. Now, when a seed that you have to plant becomes 8,000 rupees a kilo, it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to drought, so it fails if the rain is not good. It's vulnerable to pests, even though it's called a pest control technology. The BT has not controlled the pests. So the farmers spend more and more. Look at the literature of 2017 and the farmer suicides related to the deaths because of the use of pesticides in the BT cotton. So when I say it's a system, I mean that it's a system that monopolizes the seed, fixes a price way beyond the affordability of the farmer. No farmer has the money to buy this seed. And the video vans used to go to the villages. I watched this. And The agents of chemical companies become the distributors of seed. They just put the paper out and just sign here and take the seed. So the farmers take the seed without knowing what price it is, without knowing what they're getting into. 2 or 3 years later, they're not able to pay the debt, and the agent comes to their farm and says, this land is mine. Every suicide I know, the farmer has committed suicide in the field, borrowing one last time for a bottle of pesticide. So we should look at every step. It is a bit stupid to talk about technology. When you're talking about price, you're talking about failure, you're talking about debt. I don't talk about technology in a fragmented way. You know, I'm specialized in science and technology. I did my work in the Institute of Management on Science Technology Studies. You don't talk of technology. You talk about the embedding of tools in a system, and what does it mean ecologically, socially. Well, you know, someone who's dedicated their life to promoting organic everywhere, everywhere, in America, in Europe, in India. Obviously, I'm going to continue to promote the right kind of farming. The kind of farming that doesn't poison the earth and kill the biodiversity, the kind of farming that regenerates the soil and doesn't kill it, the kind of farming that doesn't contribute to 50% of the greenhouse gases. So any opportunity, of course I'll promote it. Now the Sri Lankan story is this. They were already in debt, as I wrote. Then you had COVID, 2020 onwards. The result of COVID and lockdown, people came back home. So there was no source of foreign exchange. And that's why the president of that time, whom I've never met and I've never talked to save expenses and reduce foreign exchange expense, just overnight announced that the 300 million they were spending on fertilizer, they will stop overnight. Now that is not an organic policy. You know, stopping fertilizers is stopping fertilizers. Organic policies, you get the entire system of agriculture to shift to research like Cuba did. Cuba went organic at the time of the sanctions. Every scientist started to work on organic farming. Organic means extension officers are trained and go to the farmers. Organic means you create local markets so the farmers can sell. And from my lifetime experience, organic does not produce less food. It's a propaganda that produces less food. So there is, if the organic had been fully implemented, like in Cuba, there would have been a crisis. Sri Lanka has a very strong organic movement. We mustn't think that the practice was just thrown on the people. Very strong organic movement. And the farmers doing organic are doing very well. Very, very well. Especially if they have local markets and they've created local markets. Local restaurants are linked to them. Just like the organic farmers who've opened outlets in Delhi, in Chennai. Yeah? So I think just like it's wrong to talk about farmers' distress as purely a technology, it's wrong to talk about the crisis of Sri Lanka and reduce it to an organic system when all it was a ban of a fertilizer for financial reasons. So this thesis of, organic makes you starve is the other side of the thesis, chemicals fed India in 1965. Neither of the narratives is true.